Alright, so I did a little work off camera. It's down here. And I made a decision on the type of point that I want to make. So I'm going to go for this point right here. This is an actual artifact. This is a Baker point, or what I think is a Baker point. A friend of mine has loaned it to me for a while so I can study this one and some other ones. But yeah, I think it's a Baker point. Just by coincidence, this point is found along and near the Pedernales River, same place the stone is located. And I tried to find an artifact that is made of the same type of material. It might not be exact, but it looks like it's very close. Alright, so Baker points are early archaic. Alright, and this one is of the bowed stem variety. It says here a second variety is less commonly barbed, and the convex stems have a bow-legged appearance. The notches of the base are more open, and the base of the notch is rounded. Okay, because some Baker points look like this here, where they're substantially barbed, and the notch at the bottom is pointed or V-shaped and not rounded like this. Okay, this has a bow-legged appearance similar to this one here, and this one on this side. So what I did was off camera I started working on the design with this material using modern tools just to get the hang of the shape without breaking too many of these pieces. But I didn't use the stone from this experiment. I used some of the other stone, okay, from the beginning of the previous video. Alright, and let me just weigh, first of all, I'll weigh the real artifact to give you an idea. Now Baker points are said to be thick, on the thick side. Alright, I'll do a ratio here in a minute, but the weight is going to be in grains. 169 or just 170 grains, but it's missing this barb here, missing some of the tip, and it looks like it's been resharpened once. Okay, usually you don't see that kind of step fracturing unless it's been resharpened, in my opinion. Okay, see this step fracturing on this side also? That looks to me like it's been resharpened once. Alright, so my goal is to produce points that look like this here, of this shape. Right, I got to make the base a little bit thicker. See how mine is very thin. The real one is thicker. And the weight of the full-size one that I made, let's see, let me get this zeroed out here. Alright, 162. So even with the point and the extra width and the extra long barbs, it's still lighter than this real artifact. Okay, so I've got to work on the thickness, which, you know, it's kind of good, because using abo tools, it's going to be difficult to thin it down anyway. The material is kind of brittle. I've got to be very aggressive. This one here snapped on me. This is the piece that I was working on in the previous video between the 11 and 14 minute mark, and there was no defect in the stone itself. I just snapped it by being too aggressive with this flake here. But it's good to know the limits of your material. This one here, I encountered some concrete along this edge and also along the base, so I just took down this edge quite a bit and blasted through a lot of that concrete. But, you know, I can't make this point out of it anymore. I'll just save it for something else. This one, I broke off the tip, but I went ahead and made the base. Anyway, so it's a little bit closer in proportion. This one is still, the real one is still thicker. Alright, so during this experiment I'll be doing the knapping with abo tools, so don't worry. All these were made with modern tools just so I can get in the hang of it without ruining my stone, my practice stone. Okay, so I think that's it on the explanation. I can't tell if this is heat treated or not. I'm going to assume it is not. Because this stone looks to be a very good quality. Okay. So it doesn't need heat treating. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this one as a pattern and see what I can get from this stack. I'm not going to be able to use this piece, so that's waste for this experiment. I can definitely, use these bigger pieces. This one maybe, if I'm lucky. So I'll save it anyway. This is very clunky, but I think I might be able to do it. This one definitely not. This one definitely not. It's just way too small. Yep. This one maybe. I can definitely do it with modern tools, but with abo tools I'm not sure. We're pushing the limits on some of these, especially with this really big clunker. I'm going to keep it anyway and try it. It's got some good quality material here, so I may be able to, run long flakes there, but it's got a big dip. We're going to have to be extremely lucky. We'll just try it anyway. Nope. Maybe. Just barely. That one's just barely too. Pushing my luck on these. I'll just try it anyway. And this one definitely not. Okay, so if I was back in the day on the quarry site, I'd bring a finished point with me, gather some stones, spall some out, and then make preforms and bring back the preforms to where I was actually living. Okay, now if the quarry is right next to where they live, or if the quarry was right next to where I live, I would just make these at the quarry site and bring back the finish points. I wouldn't lug around big chunks of stone for any reason. All right. The reason why I would bring back preforms is because when you're reducing the preforms down, you can use some of the flakes that come off, as cutting tools that come off the preforms. Or you can bring home chunks like this and knock flakes off, use them. But I think most of the time they were making preforms and then bringing home the preforms. I think that's what the archaeological record suggests. Okay, now they don't have to only make projectile points. At the quarry site you can make a bunch of little blades like I have here. A lot of these came off just incidentally, they weren't made on purpose from the spalling, but you could bring home these, bring home preforms, and that way you don't have to worry about saving too much of the debitage. You know, trying to make big flakes off of these to come up with these. You can bring home blades from the quarry site and bring home preforms from the quarry site. You know what I mean? Let's see. I'm trying to look for something that looks like a preform. You're not sure what I mean. You know, bring home this type of stuff. Kind of thick. Just barely worked down to shape. Something that's large enough that I could get something. This one's a little bit too small, but just large enough you could probably get something out of it. Probably more like this one here. This will be a preform more in line with what you would use to make something like this. Or actually, it's almost a preform. Still has some of the cortical surfaces on it, which usually were taken off before removing from the quarry site. Okay. So I think you get the idea. So what I want to do is, you know, reproduce in the correct sequence what they used to do. Now I'm going to weigh this pile here. Since I'm rejecting this over here, I'm going to weigh to see what I got. I think it was 5 pounds 6 ounces on the original stone. Let's see what I've got now. Okay, bit of a balancing act, but this is 3 pounds 11 ounces. Okay, so I've already lost quite a bit, and I haven't even reduced this down to preforms yet, and some of the preforms are going to fail. You know, it'll fail at various stages. It might fail at this stage, but the thickness actually helps, you know, preserve both the weight and the strength. So, you know, choosing points on the thick side is kind of cheating, I know, but that's what they were made. That's how they were made. You know, these particular ones were made kind of thick. All right, so I said I was going to do the proportions on this one. Let's see. I had the tape measure just a minute ago. All right, so the width on this 1.25 inches. Now the original, come on, focus. The original width was probably more along the lines of this here. Okay, so I'm going to measure this. Let's just call it 1.25 inches to allow for resharpening. 1.25 inches wide, and the thickness five eighths. I mean 5/16. Yeah, 5/16. I'm looking through the viewfinder here. Okay, yeah. The thickest part is 5/16. So you can get the ratio, you know, with the thickness ratio, which is going to be, you know, about 4:1, I guess. Let's see. Almost 5:1. the total length I'm going to shoot for somewhere between 2.5, 2 3/4, which I don't think is unreasonable. You know, if this still had the tip on it, okay. All right. Okay, so I'm going to start preforming these with natural materials and abo tools. And my goal is this here as the pattern. Again, I'm a little thin on this. I've got to keep in mind the thickness. And I've also looked at some first stage, or what they call first stage artifacts that look like this, that have bases like this. Some of them are quite long, I noticed. And they don't have the barbs quite as long either. You know what I'm saying? I may have made the barbs too long and the blade too short. There's another variation. I need to dig out some more information that shows these quite long. All right. So I'm not going for perfection here as far as how these Baker points were made or similar points. It's mainly an exercise in percentage yield. This will lead me into other videos also where I have rock challenges that people have asked me to show them how to maximize the yield from these rocks and what to expect, and especially with low quality material. So this is good for that. This particular exercise is good for those challenges. It'll also help me in developing techniques for keeping thickness in mind. You know, if you want to end up with a thick point, that's a different mindset than wanting to end up with a thin point. With thick points, you've got to start out with a pretty flat flake or preform. Thin ones, you can start with the one that's curved and thin it down a lot, and you'll get a thin, straight arrowhead out of a curved piece if you do it right. You know what I'm saying? The thinner it gets, the easier the profile will fit into a curved flake, and the shorter it is, of course. But when you start getting really thin, you can take off quite a bit of that curve. But when it comes to these thicker points, and especially if they're longer, you're going to have larger preforms. Okay, and I'm doing a lot of these spalling videos because it's going to help me to spall down or to preform down along blades like this one here, as long as I don't drop them. I still have to do some hohokum points, and I'm still trying to understand the process of getting to this point on these very, very long and sometimes very, very thin artifacts. Okay, I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around how they're made. So this will lead me into that. So it may seem kind of chaotic the way I'm proceeding. Well, probably always seems that way. But I'm trying to do two things at once. I'm trying to get practice at doing things that lead me into the other videos. I still got quite a bit to catch up with. And I've got to make some more abo tools. This is one of the hohokum points I worked on recently. I was going to make a video and I ended up snapping off the tip. I think what happens is I start off too thin. Okay, I need to start off thicker and then thin as I go, slowly, so that I don't, you know, end up working with a really thin piece in the beginning. Toward the very end, when you do little bitty flakes, it's okay to have a thin piece because you're not stressing it very much. But I got really close to finishing this, and I could have been thicker and protected the point from breakage if I had just been a little bit thicker, I think. Because I think I was napping near the tip here, and it snapped down below because it was bending too much. All right. And this has happened quite a bit on these Hohokam preforms and points. If anyone's tried these, there is a definite skill involved in these long thin points, and it starts with the bifacing and preform stage. It's very important. Okay, so without talking too much, I've been criticized for talking too much in the beginning of videos, and I understand that. So let's see, let's just get right into this. Now, none of this is heat treated. It's all raw stone. Some parts of it are extremely good quality and some parts are very bad quality. That's why it's a rock challenge. You know, it doesn't take much practice to get good at working very consistent, very good stone. But it takes a lot of practice to get good at working stone that's not consistent. Even this one is not going to be the same as another one of these spalls. So the spalls are not consistent and the material is not consistent within the spall. So some of you may think that this is excellent material. I mean, it's not bad, but it's not excellent. Some of it will spoil you. Some of it will torture you. And if it's mostly tortured material, you'll hit really, really hard to get through it, and then you get to a nice area and you hit really hard and you'll just kind of shatter it, all the pieces. So it's a little bit of a gamble. You got to be good at taking risks. And all I'm doing right now is trying to get rid of all the sharp, weak areas. And I've looked at real artifact preforms too, and they seem to be percussion preforms, direct percussion, with very little grinding. And if you want to add your observations in the comments, that would be awesome. But I've noticed very little grinding on those preforms and a lot of percussion work, probably with hammerstone, since it's the easiest to find and the easiest thing to work with, as opposed to, you know, cutting a chunk of antler or lugging around big heavy stones. A small hammerstone of a lightweight type of stone like a limestone is probably the most common, and then second most common is a small quartzite stone. But you know, these are also used. This starts out like this, and then it develops either a flat spot on the edge or on this side, or both. Let's see. I was recently given this one. This is a real hammerstone here. This is a real artifact. See, it's flat on one side here, and I'm thinking, you know, it could be used as a mano on a matate, right? And then used to flint-knap with as well. But I'm not quite sure. The wear is a little bit strange. It is pitted, you know, like a normal hammerstone, but it's not, big chunks are not taken out. Like, see, the way I knap, my hammerstones become very jaggedy, for lack of a better word. You know, there's big pieces taken out sometimes. And I develop flat spots. This one here, it doesn't quite look like there's a flat spot developing anywhere. Right here maybe. So this may have been used for some other type of either pecking or smashing, and not, you know, hitting stones like this. You know, preforms. Just something to think about. Okay. Something to think about before I take a risk. Start hammering away. Yeah, so this next series of videos, I might narrate quite a bit, but we'll see. It's hard for me to develop a strategy while I'm talking. Not that a strategy is always necessary, but unconsciously there is a strategy in the back of your mind, usually. That may have been better performed with an antler instead of a hammerstone. Let's see. I've already crushed it, so maybe it's too late. Let me see. See, hammerstone will crush the edge easily if you're not careful. It also removes a lot of material, which makes it very attractive if you don't have much time. Let's see if I can. This is stronger anyway. It may not crush just because it's stronger, but I don't want to hit that with a hammerstone. I'm going to try it with the billet. Very nice. I gotta keep these proportions in mind. I still got plenty of room. I'm going to do the bigger ones first. It'll give me practice for the smaller ones that are more difficult. This is an elk antler, a beam, and this is it's a shed, right? So this is the part near the skull. Yeah, I bought it off of eBay. Brand new. Okay. But, you know, I shaped it myself. I like to cut this off so I can have a sharp end and a dull end. This is for more precise or more difficult to reach areas. More precise strikes or more difficult to reach strikes. And this is just general purpose, the wider end. As long as it's not too rounded. I like to use the rim because I can get in some of these tight areas. Not this area, but if I wanted to hit within a concave area, I got to make sure that that rim is, you know, pointy enough. Okay. They say that antler doesn't produce bulbs that are as bad as hammerstones, but that one's pretty bad. So I mean, you can produce flakes that look like hammerstone flakes with the billet, and vice versa. It's very, very difficult to tell. But in my opinion, most of these artifacts are reduced with hammerstone in this stage, from the spall to the preform. I think most of them are reduced with hammerstone and not billet, but I like the billet myself. It's a little risky on the end with a billet because it'll pull. That's one thing you don't want. A hammerstone doesn't pull as much. But this is raw stone, so it's a little more resilient in theory. One thing I didn't mention is a lot of these archaic points are done base first, which means the blade is developed later. The blade is usually just roughed out very crudely, and then the base is put in first. There's two reasons for that, I think. One is it's easier that way to thin and to create a base when you've got a nice thick body on it. All right. And number two, if you mess up the base, you can always, remove it and then start over if your preform's long enough. Okay. So that's what I'm going to try to do with a lot of these. Some of them I can't because I'm limited by space. Some of the spalls are very limited in space, so I'm going to have to do everything at once. Okay, I got a phone call. Let me get back to this. Now, some of you might be wondering, what's the difference between me doing this brushing and just grinding the edge? If you look, there's not much white powdery residue on here. Okay, it's mostly a bevel. When you grind it down, you kind of dull that sharp edge. All right, now a sharp edge is advantageous when you're using antler because the antler will grab into it. But it's also advantageous with hammerstone because hammerstone needs kind of a flat surface up high. Okay, you're not hitting directly on the edge, so grinding on the edge is not going to help the hammerstone do too much because you're hitting kind of high anyway with a hammerstone. Right? It will get rid of the weak spots, but it'll make it much more difficult to remove a flake if you've got too much grinding. Of course, not enough will crush and cause a step fracture, so there's a balance there. Now, what I'm trying to do is set up to remove the turtle back here in the middle. Now, sometimes what I end up doing is I spend a lot of time working on one edge and then I flip it over and I see, you know what, I might be able to actually run that ridge better from this side. So we'll try both. You know, I might cause a step fracture here, and then I'll run from this side and remove the step fracture, or I might just strike from this side first. This one's a difficult case because we've got a very very uneven platform with, you know, bumps everywhere. And also I've got only a little bit of a space between these two bad spots to make the strike, so I can't make any mistakes and then move to the other side. Also, it's right in the middle. Okay, so this has a potential of creating a radial fracture right down the middle because, you know, the bending forces. It's the worst possible scenario. Limited options for strike. The overshot or the long flake from the other side terminated in a step, which makes any subsequent flakes weaker, although it's not too bad. I could still try, but you know, there's a concavity in there. I would have to take this edge down a lot, shoot a flake across. If I can't somehow just blast through that, I'm going to have to do the flake from the other side technique. But all this happens pretty fast when you're in the zone. You don't really think about it too much. So what I did there is I tried to create a convexity. Now I might be able to strike this edge. Some of you might be thinking, why didn't you just do that with pressure? It'd be a lot neater, a lot less chaotic. It's time influences a lot of what I do. Everything could be done better and more accurately with pressure, but it just takes time, and it also takes a little more endurance. If you only have to do one of these in a day, that'd be fine, but I've got a bunch more to spall down here. Just like I think they were doing it back then. You don't just make one point at a time, you try to make as many as you can in one sitting, because most of the time you're out looking for food. Okay, I'm supporting it right here in the middle. I just hit my knuckle with that ridge. Just made some really good annoying contact there. But yeah, I'm holding it right under that ridge, so I'm not bending it. You know what I mean? If I were to bridge it like this, it'd be okay. But then, you know, for some reason I have a harder time hitting it if I'm bridging it like that. Kind of try to balance it like this, but I usually use my center finger here. Let's see. I gotta do this just right, because if I hit too hard, it'll break it. That platform's gotta be just right. I could just zigzag everything, but then I'd lose too much width. The simple solution to a bad edge is just zigzag it. But I'm tempted to strike it anyway, because I've got a little bit of a platform there. I could, you know, push a flake that way. Let's see. It's kind of awkward because I could scrape my finger along this edge and cut myself pretty bad if I'm not careful. Yeah, that's too much thickness there for a pressure flake. I might zigzag this. See, this is really low. All right, so if I hit this really hard, it'll overshoot, and I don't want that to happen. I hit on this side hoping that it would remove more of this platform, but it stayed. So yeah, I managed to create a little ledge. I took a flake that way, created a little scoop out, and that scoop out allowed me to get in there, pop that off. I almost overshot it, but it didn't quite, so that worked out okay. Okay. But I'm really narrow there. But I don't need to make it very long. I might do a long one. Let's just try for a long one. That way I can show you what I think might be a first stage. Now, indirect percussion is good for getting accurate flakes, but they're kind of thin, and I do need to thin it down more. And I do need to take deep flakes. Indirect doesn't usually take deep flakes on this tough material, so we'll see. I might go back to the billet for this area. Kind of tempted just to, remove a lot of this tip so I can get past this concrete, but I want to do this in sequence. They usually did the bases first, I think, so I'm going to wait till later to do the tip. As long as there's no cracks that I can see that could break this in half or in 3/4 and 1/4. If there's any cracks along here, if I'm hitting the base, it'll just snap the tip off. Good example of why to keep it long. See how that barb, I won't be able to capture a barb unless I move it up. That means I'm going to lose a lot of this base here. I wasn't planning on removing that much, and I don't even think I hit it up here. I don't think I hit that up there. I think I hit it near the edge and it just cracked here. But I may have hit it way too high. But no, it won't even reach that point. So I'm not too sure why it broke there. Now I'm hitting kind of above center line here. See that? It's all depositing right here. That is above center line, but if I can get it to scoop out, it should go right under that big old mass. But that's why it doesn't want to go. It requires a lot of energy to get that to scoop out. So we're just going to lower the platform. This might become too narrow. Okay, I'm getting close to the limit. I'm right at the limit. Let's see. Alright, so I'm going to pause here and upload some of this before my camera fills up with video. But yeah, I'm going to have to be very careful about thinning this down. Some of you guys, well, a lot of you guys continuously ask me how to thin these things down, and as you can see, I use a lot of indirect percussion for thinning. So that's my answer on these. Oops. Wrong mallet. It's better to have something long to get better velocity. But yeah, on raw stone, you have to use a lot of force, a lot of velocity, and be very careful about the location of the platform. Not so much the shape of the platform, but just the location. Because you can usually make adjustments in hitting the platform if it's not exactly right. But the platform can't be too high up or too low. And if you're looking opportunistically, you've got to. It's kind of risky, but that's the way I usually nap. I nap with a lot of risk. All right.